Welcome back to Bound by Grace podcast. I'm Amber Hunt. This is my testimony part 4. I wanted to backtrack just a little bit. I know I discussed that Grayson came home after 4 months of being in the hospital at Chapel Hill. But in the midst of that, I was still working. So I would visit him 1 to 2 times a week, at least once a week, since it was 2.5 hours away and I still had to work during the week. I would make it a point to go at least every Wednesday and most of Fridays after work. Everyone knew that at work. One day, my boss sat me down, as we usually did before getting after it, and he studied me for a bit. We sat in silence, and then he looked at me and he said, "How much would it cost?" And I was like, what do you mean?" He said, "In your situation, have you ever thought about a sugar daddy?" And I was like, "No," because I didn't want him to know that I actually had already done that. And I was guessing that he was searching on the sugar daddy sites and must have come across my profile because I had completely forgotten to delete it. And he said, "How much would it cost a month, do you think? Just ballpark. Just throw something out there." And I laughed and played it off and was completely uncomfortable. I felt ashamed, and I knew that he probably saw my profile. The next week, we were out on a sales call, and he stood even closer to me and he began to touch my waist. Just kind of nonchalantly, but I knew that it was sexual. So I was completely uncomfortable. Then the Friday of Easter, I believe it was Easter, because I know that it was a holiday. I think it was Good Friday. We went out on a call. He rarely went with people on a call, but he always went with me on calls pretty often. He went with me on a call. He drove, and he said it was going to be a short day. And I said, "Good, that means that I can go see my son." And we drove by newly developed hotels. And he said, "What if we got a hotel?" And I kind of laughed it off, and I was like, "Why would we get a hotel?" Playing stupid. And he was like, "No reason." And then he said, "I think we should get one." And I was completely uncomfortable, started feeling backed into a corner, felt like my life was in his hands, because if I were to refuse, I could lose my job and essentially lose my livelihood and not be able to provide for my children. So I was trying to say no subtly by playing it off and laughing instead of outrightly saying, "Please stop speaking to me this way." We drove a little further. I thought we were going back to the office, and instead, he parked the car at an abandoned gas station. He reached over and he put his hand on my knee and started to squeeze it. I got completely uncomfortable, but I didn't know what to say. And then all of a sudden, he got a phone call from one of my coworkers. He answered the phone call and he whispered to me, "Shh, be quiet," as he continued to squeeze my leg. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know how to feel. I knew I just wanted to go see my son. And when he got off the phone, he took his hand off. He started to poke me in my sides, trying to tickle me. I started to move closer and closer to the door, sinking into the door, trying to become one with the door. I just wanted out of there. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I just want to go see my son." And then I looked out the window and tears started streaming down my face. And he said, "Okay." So then we had one last stop. We get out of the vehicle. I walked quickly. He tried to stay up with me. I think he could tell that he had crossed a line. I drove a truck back to work from this area. We were there to pick up a truck, and I told him I would drive it. He tried to have someone else drive it so I would be in the car with him again, and I insisted. When I got back to work, I quickly got in my vehicle and left. I went to go see Grayson. The whole way I cried. I remember calling my mom, telling her what happened, telling her that I knew this was going to happen. He had had signs of trying to do things, trying to get close to me. But he took advantage of someone that needed any help they could get. She gave me advice. She came from the corporate world. She gave me the best advice she could. And I waited the weekend. When I went back to work on Monday, I walked into the office. He was irritable. I sat down and he said, "I'm sorry about how I acted on Friday." And I got very mad and I said, "You should be. You should never touch me." 10 minutes later, he wrote me up. And I knew that it was done out of retaliation because I wasn't accepting of him and what he wanted. So I left the office. I knew this was going to get worse, and I reported it. I was told to go home and wait for a call. Once I received a call, they told me to go into corporate and speak with the owner. When I walked into the office of the owner, there was a woman standing there waiting for me, and the owner was sitting at the desk. A long table. They were sitting at a long table, like a conference table. She had her computer out. She started to type everything that was being said. And he asked me what happened. And I told him. And he kind of chuckled. And he said, "Why do you think he did this?" And I said, "Because he's clearly attracted to me and thought something might happen." He laughed again, looked at me, and said, "Why would he be attracted to you?" And I looked at him angrily, and I said, "Why would you say that to me?" And he said, "Well, let's just say this. Why didn't you stop it?" I said, "There shouldn't have been anything that I would have had to stop. His actions were completely inappropriate." He told me that he would think on it, on how he wanted to proceed, do an investigation, and for me to stay home until the investigation was over and I receive a call. I received a call later that afternoon, and it was telling me that they no longer needed me, they were letting me go, and that someone would come pick up my vehicle. It was the owner and another person that came pick up my vehicle. When they did, I was smart enough to take out my cell phone and put it on record, and I asked him to repeat what he said to me in the conference room, and he did. So I got it on recording, him saying, "Why would he be attracted to you, and why didn't you stop it?" He apologized to me afterwards, saying, "I just mean that you should know better." And I couldn't explain to him that someone, a woman or a man, that is in a situation like that, they can fight, but not everyone does. And people that have been through a lot of trauma usually freeze. And I tend to freeze. And then thinking about how he was my direct manager, I knew that I was going to lose my job, which I did. It was the good old boy system. Unfortunately, it was the good old boy system. So after they picked up the vehicle, I went back inside and I instantly called a lawyer. I couldn't afford one, so I found one that would do it where they would fight for me and then they would take a portion of the winnings. I wish that I was more patient back then and that I could have waited to receive the winnings, because they made me wait a year and a half before we finally settled. And it was a low ball amount, and I should have taken them to court instead of settling, especially since they made it where I couldn't get a job at all because I had to put them down that I worked for them. And when I tried to get a job, they had already spoken with them and they told me, "We're going to pass. We don't want to wait until the ball drops." So I'm guessing that they ended up telling them that the story in a whole different way to make me look bad. So I opened up an unlicensed daycare. Grayson came home. John's parents were in a bad way and they moved in. They weren't my favorite people, but I felt obligated since they were my children's grandparents. So I helped them out for a bit. And then John came back. He wanted to see the kids. Even though he hadn't paid child support, he hadn't contacted them, and it had been over a year, he all of a sudden wanted to see them. So I let him see them. I went on a date and I let him babysit. When I came back, he was waiting for me and he stated that he wanted to come back home. He disclosed that his then girlfriend had kicked him out and he realized that he still loved me and he wanted to come back home. I felt sick. I felt like he was only coming back because he had nowhere to go. And after leaving me with no support, with 3 daughters, I was over it. I was over him. So I told him absolutely not. He cried and he left. I told him that he hadn't given support and he hadn't been consistent at all in trying to have a relationship with his children. Why would I choose for him to come back home? After he left, he disappeared again for quite a while. I started messaging Brent, my now husband, on Bumble. We messaged for a few months, and then we started to say maybe we should meet. And they were little messages here and there. It was like, "Hi, how's your morning? How are you?" It wasn't getting in great detail. So it was Christmas time. He was in Virginia for Christmas. We decided that we would meet after he got back from Virginia, so after New Year's, but didn't plan on how that was going to occur. The father of Grayson ended up reaching back out. During this time, I found out that he had been cheating on me while we were seeing each other with his ex-wife. And I knew that he was a functioning alcoholic. So I knew that he needed a lot of help. He had a lot of bad dreams. He would scream in his sleep. He was active duty Army, had a lot of trauma from different trips that he took. And I was really feeling down. I felt betrayed again. So I reached out to Brent and said, "Hey, why don't you come over with some wine and some ice cream?" And he said, "Absolutely," and then said he'd be on his way shortly. And then I thought to myself, I'm kind of doing the same thing again, the vicious cycle where I start to feel lonely and I invite someone over. So I called, or I actually texted him and said, "You know what? I'm not feeling up to it. Let's cancel and do this another time." And he said, "Too late, already on the way." And knowing Brent now, I know that if he would have canceled and allowed me to cancel, we probably wouldn't have seen each other again. He wasn't exactly my type, but I had this in my mind that maybe I needed someone that wasn't my type to get something different. And he is not someone to push you to do something you don't want to do. So the fact that he said, "Too late, on my way," is kind of funny to me now. But I started scrambling, trying to get ready, trying to look decent, trying to look like I hadn't been crying. And then he showed up at my door. And once I opened the door, I was uncomfortable, felt awkward. I knew I wasn't attracted to him and let him in. And we sat, we watched a movie, we snuggled and cuddled and didn't have sex. We just ate ice cream, drank, and we ended up falling asleep on the couch. The next day, he ended up going into work and he wanted to come back that night. But I ended up having 3 sick kids at the same time. Everyone had the stomach bug. And I warned him that I'm not going to fake it. I was so tired of being fake just to get some guy to like me. This was reality. I'm a single mom. I have 4 kids and I can't fake it anymore. Either you're going to love me for who I am or you're not, and that is fine. So I told him the kids were sick, to please not come over. He said he wanted to help, and I agreed, but I told him how real it was that we're throwing up, it's coming out both ends, like it's not pretty. He shows up to the door and instantly starts to try and help. I get in the shower with my baby who had thrown up all over himself and start washing him. And then while I'm in the shower, Brent brings me my 5-year-old. She had thrown up in her bed and had it all over herself. So we traded. I gave him the baby, and then she got in the shower with me. When I got out of the shower with her, I went to her bed to start stripping it and start to clean, and he had already done it. That is when I started to fall in love with Brent. That is when I knew this man is different. Especially knowing him now and how much throw up makes him gag, I know that he was sent from God. that this was something that was special. He never left since then. He was this piece of a puzzle that just fit. Without trying, it was just so easy. He was a part of our family from the moment he stepped into the house. And I love my husband more than I've loved anyone in my whole entire life. I am in love with that man. I highly respect that man. We've been through a lot, and our marriage is not perfect. But where we are now is the healthiest I've ever been in any relationship I've ever known. We had a lot of rocky starts in the beginning of our relationship, and we'll get into that in another podcast. I didn't love him when we married. I just knew that he fit like a glove, and it was a great companionship. But I fell in love with him. The longer we've been together, the more I love him. And the attraction, that came. The more I fell in love with that man, the more he is my type. I look at him and I love that man. I love the way he looks. I love his body. I love the way he talks. I love his little things that he does when he gets irritated, or the face that he makes when he starts to fix something. I love every little detail. And I love how he loves me. I'm so used to being left. I'm so used to being cheated on. I was expecting it and waiting for it. I pushed him away in the beginning of our relationship, almost like, eventually you're going to leave and I don't want to get hurt, so I'm just going to make you leave. I was relentless, and he never once gave up on me. That's the kind of love that you should have in your marriage. That's the kind of love that God shows us. We push and we push and we push away. We run away. And God always finds us no matter what deep, dark place we are. And he offers his love and just waits for us to come near. I hope you enjoyed this episode. That's the end of my testimony. This was a very broad overview. There's a lot of details mixed in to each event that we went through. And hopefully, as we move along in these episodes, we can utilize some of those details as a learning experience, a healing experience, and dive into God's Word and what He has to say about those experiences. I hope you have a wonderful night, and thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.